There are moments in history when a question echoes so loudly it demands more than just an answer. It demands the truth. Today, we ask one such question. Has America really become an enemy of India? At first glance, it feels dramatic, maybe even uncomfortable. But sometimes the truth hides behind what we refuse to confront. This isn't a story about hate. It's a journey into the hidden layers of global power, shifting loyalties, and the rise of a nation that refuses to be silenced. As the world watches India climb with pride and purpose, there are forces, subtle, strategic, and silent, that wish to keep it in check. This speech isn't about blame. It's about awareness. It's about asking why a friend sometimes acts like a rival, why support comes with conditions, and why progress is seen as a threat, not a triumph. So stay with me to the very end. What you're about to hear may not be comfortable, but it will be real. And once you've heard it, you'll never see the headlines the same way again. Let's begin. When two nations shake hands in public, the world sees friendship. But behind those firm handshakes often lie agendas, power balances, and shifting loyalties. The United States and India have, in recent decades, referred to each other as strategic partners. On paper, the bond looks unbreakable. Mutual defense dialogues, technology exchanges, and economic cooperation. But if you look deeper, something unsettling begins to emerge. The United States, while strengthening ties with India, has simultaneously nurtured complex relationships with India's adversaries, especially in South Asia. It has continued arms sales, military aid, and diplomatic cover for countries whose strategic objectives directly threaten India's security and sovereignty. This duality brings into question the authenticity of America's commitment to the Indian partnership. When a supposed friend invests in your neighbor's army, knowing full well that neighbor has crossed your borders in hostility, trust begins to erode. Beyond defense, this contradiction extends into global forms where the U.S. has sometimes chosen silence or neutrality rather than firmly standing with India. While India has repeatedly shown solidarity with American interests, from climate pacts to counter-terror operations, the reciprocation has often been delayed or diluted. The truth is, alliances in global politics are rarely based on pure friendship. They are shaped by interest, influence, and leverage. America's interest in India is rooted not only in shared democratic values, but also in counterbalancing China. This makes India, when nations come together as partners, one would expect fairness, mutual respect, and shared prosperity. But when we look closely at how America handles trade and sanctions with India, a different picture emerges, one filled with strategic calculations rather than friendship. Over the years, the United States has imposed various economic pressures on India, sometimes directly and at other times through global institutions influenced by its power. Whether it's restrictions on defense purchases from nations like Russia or limitations on access to high-end technologies, these decisions often place India in a bind. The irony is, while the U.S. insists on India supporting its information as power, and those who control the narrative often control the perception. Over the past few decades, a pattern has emerged in how major U.S.-based media outlets and think tanks portray India on the global stage. Despite being the world's largest democracy, India frequently finds itself under harsh international scrutiny, with headlines focused on its internal issues, government policies, and social climate, often without balanced context or historical understanding. The selective amplification of certain events, while ignoring progress and reforms, paints a distorted image, creating doubts in the minds of the global audience. This isn't just journalism, it's influence wrapped in storytelling. When India takes bold stances in global politics or asserts its sovereignty in matters like defense purchases or internal laws, there's often a noticeable rise in critical coverage. From freedom of speech to minority rights, India is judged through a lens that doesn't always apply the same standards to Western allies. The intent here may not be overt hostility, but the consequences are far-reaching. And by far more, such narratives affect foreign policy discussions, international investment, and diplomatic relations. The public perception built by media plays directly into the hands of policymakers who rely on this information to make decisions. It also sows seeds of doubt within India's youth, questioning their country's image based on external voices rather than internal truths. Meanwhile, real stories of innovation, infrastructure, education reforms, and poverty reduction rarely make global headlines. This imbalance raises an important question. Why is India's rise so uncomfortable to some within these powerful circles? The truth is, as India asserts its voice and identity in a world once dominated by Western narratives, resistance is natural, but it becomes dangerous when perception is manipulated to influence policy, economics, and public opinion on a global scale. Terrorism has been one of the darkest challenges India has faced over the decades, claiming countless innocent lives and threatening the nation's peace and progress. In moments of crisis, when India needed a clear and firm stand from its global partners, America's response has often been cautious, delayed, or strategically vague. While the U.S. claims to be a strong ally in the global fight against terror, its actions tell a different story when terrorism affects Indian soil. When terror attacks are traced back to actors operating from across the border, especially from countries with deep strategic or military ties to the U.S., the reaction from Washington tends to be limited to statements of concern or generic condemnation. Rarely does it involve tangible action that matches the gravity of the crime. Instead of standing firmly beside India, the U.S. has frequently prioritized its own geopolitical interess, choosing to maintain relationships with nations that openly harbor or support extremist elements. For India, this selective silence feels like betrayal. Despite being a responsible power, India has shown resilience and restraint in times of provocation, but it has also expected its allies to recognize its pain and take meaningful steps in support. The lack of consistency from the U.S. during such times has caused deep mistrust among Indian citizens and analysts alike. They ask, if a true friend cannot speak up when innocent lives are lost, then what value does that friendship really hold? This selective silence is not just a matter of diplomacy. It sends a message to the world about which lives matter and which conflicts deserve action. By choosing silence or neutrality in the face of Indian tragedies, the U.S. risks being seen not as a friend, but as a power player who picks sides only when it suits their long-term goals. The Quad, or Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, was introduced as a symbol of strategic cooperation between four major democracies: India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. On the surface, it promised unity, shared vision, and collective action in the Indo-Pacific region, especially to counter growing Chinese influence. But with time, the cracks beneath this alliance began to show. India, hopeful for consistent support, has often found itself carrying more weight than the rest, particularly when tensions with China rise at its borders. The U.S., while speaking loudly about Indo-Pacific cooperation, has shown inconsistent commitment when real pressure mounts. During key moments, such as border clashes or aggressive posturing from Beijing, India's expectation of vocal and visible support from its allies, especially America, often goes unmet. Instead, the U.S. issues carefully worded statements clearly aimed at not upsetting its economic ties with China. It's a clear indication that while India views the Quad as a platform for collective security, The U.S. might view it more as a pressure valve, useful when convenient, silent when inconvenient. Moreover, defense cooperation within the Quad rarely translates into real-time strategic backing when India is in need. Military drills and conferences look good on camera, but they don't replace the necessity of standing shoulder to shoulder during actual conflict or tension. This pattern of selective involvement exposes the limitations of such alliances. It suggests that for America, India's role in the Quad is less about mutual defense and more about maintaining balance without committing too deeply. The illusion of equal partnership begins to fade when one partner hesitates at every critical moment. India is learning that even multilateral platforms designed with noble goals can be weakened when key players use them as tools of convenience rather than bonds of trust and responsibility. India's rise on the global stage is no longer subtle. It is deliberate, confident, and driven by a vision of self-reliance and sovereignty. With initiatives like Make in India, technological advancements, and a growing voice in international diplomacy, India is stepping out of the shadow of Western dependence. But such a shift does not come without friction. For decades, global power structures have been shaped and dominated by the West, particularly the United States. The emergence of a strong, independent India threatens this long-held monopoly. Unlike nations that rely heavily on Western approval, India is carving its own path, buying defense systems from Russia, building strategic ties with multiple nations, and refusing to take sides in polarized global conflicts. This assertiveness makes India unpredictable, and unpredictability to a power like the U.S. often translates into discomfort. In response, subtle pressures begin to appear: trade barriers, technology restrictions, diplomatic resistance in multilateral forums, and even negative media campaigns. These are not direct confrontations, but tactical efforts to slow India's momentum. When India succeeds in space missions, develops indigenous weapons, or stands firm on global issues, it sends a message that it no longer needs permission to lead. This shift undermines the control once held by the West in setting narratives, rules, and alliances. The uncomfortable truth is that as India moves from being a regional power to a global force, it becomes a challenge to the very system that once tried to shape it. The reaction from America and its allies is not always open opposition. It is more often a quiet resistance masked as concern, policy shifts, or partnership reevaluations. India is not seeking dominance, but dignity. And in doing so, it threatens those who are used to calling the shots. That is where friction begins, and that is where the truth quietly reveals itself. So, has America really become an enemy of India? The truth isn't written in black and white. It lies in the gray space between diplomacy and self-interest, between public smiles and private strategy. What we've seen is not open hostility, but something far more complex. A friendship shaped by convenience, guided by control, and tested by India's rising independence. The world's largest democracy no longer wishes to play second to anyone. It demands respect, not permission. And in doing so, it exposes the fragile threads that often hold global alliances together. The United States may not call itself an enemy, but its actions reveal a fear of a new world where power is shared, not monopolized. India must walk its own path now, not in the shadows of global giants, but alongside them, shoulder to shoulder, or far ahead when necessary. The days of waiting for validation are over. The time has come to redefine strength, trust, and what true partnership really means. To everyone listening, believe in your voice, your country, and your truth. Let no narrative define your destiny, and let no alliance hold your progress hostage. Good luck, and thank you for staying with this truth till the very end. Keep rising, keep questioning, keep walking forward.